All right. We are ready to go. Thank you for being with us. For those of you who join us tonight, we've got a lot going on tonight. So I'd imagine that most of you are going to watch us after the fact, but I'm really excited for those of you who are with us here today. We've got White Sox taking on the Cubs. And yes, I put it in that order on purpose. Been a White Sox fan for a long time. I know campaigns are supposed to be additive, not subtractive. So I'm supposed to say woohoo for all Chicago sports teams. But my producer is trolling me wearing a Cubs hat. A little behind the scenes, we were talking last night after some campaign events, and I was ragging on Pete Crow Armstrong, saying PCA is overrated. And then he demolished my White Sox last night. So my producer he's smiling at me right now. He was very happy about that. I still think he's overrated. Not the second best player in all of Major League Baseball. That's ridiculous. But he is one of the best. I will grant that. And last night, he shut me up. So congratulations, Cubs fans. We got two more. Let's see what happens these next couple games. I wouldn't blame you if you had the Cubs fan open on one screen or up on your TV while watching us. Or if you just watched the Cubs-Sox game and then watched us after the fact. Again, probably would understand that. We also have tonight, there's some primaries going on around the country. And I know I'm not supposed to be a pundit anymore. I'm not supposed to be a strategist anymore. But forgive me for being human. Of course, like many of you, I was just interested to see how the two Illinois transplants, how they did down in District 19, Byron Donald's old seat. Jim Oberweis, Catalina Lauf were running in that district alongside a giant list of people, most of which were transplants who moved into that district. Turns out Catalina Lauf got second, Jim Oberweis got third, so neither of them won. So just an interesting thing for those of us who are in politics in Illinois. We've seen so many people leave this state and run for office in other states, and some of them have been successful. In this case, these two were not. Anyways, getting back to our campaign. It has been an exhausting week since the last time we've done one of these lives. Since then, I've done 4 TV interviews, including Fox 32 and WGN out of Chicago, and then a couple TV stations out of Peoria. I've done 2 radio interviews, 5, maybe more, 5 podcasts at least. I've had the op-ed in the Chicago Tribune, and at least a dozen comments in print media and articles around the state. That's just in the last week. So if you're wondering if our campaign has momentum, yes, it does. We had well over 1 million impressions on social media just in the last week. I think it was 30,000 engagements, but I don't have the latest data from today. So that's gaining momentum. We are raising our profile every week. So it's exciting to see. And we're not even in the main campaign season yet. Everybody knows the semi-official kickoff for campaigns is the state fair, which I'm going to talk about in a second. That's this week. The official kickoff, when voters finally really start paying attention, is after Labor Day weekend. So if we're continuing to see this type of growing momentum even before Labor Day, I'm excited to see what things are going to look like over the final 2 months. So stay tuned for that. I mentioned the state fair. We've had some interesting developments over the last week or so that continue to show how rigged the system is against the two political parties, or against anybody not in the two political parties. I mentioned the state fair. Well, you've got Governor's Day coming up at the state fair, and then the day after that is Republican Day. If you're left wondering, what about all the rest of the people who aren't Republican or Democrat, you're not the only ones, especially as independents continue to grow to become a larger and larger share of the electorate. We are now 47% of the electorate. That's independents. Meanwhile, Democrats nationwide are 27% and Republicans are 25%. So if you're wondering why at the taxpayer-funded state fair, we are highlighting and celebrating the two political parties who combined make up just barely a majority of our voters, and that number is shrinking every year, you'd be right to wonder why that is and why we're not celebrating the rest of Illinoisans and their political leanings. It's just one further indication of how rigged the system is in this in this state against anybody who isn't going to run under one of the two political parties. I mentioned those political parties. 27% of voters in this state I'm sorry, 23%, fewer than 23% of voters in this state showed up in the last primary. So again, you've got to wonder, where's the representation for the remaining 77%? And that's the answer I continue to give when people ask the question, why are you running? Why aren't you getting behind one of the political candidates? Because fewer than a quarter of voters even saw fit to show up for these political candidates back in the primary on March 17th. Somebody's got to represent the rest of Illinoisans, and that's what we're building here in this campaign. We are bringing together what is going to be very soon the majority of voters. Independents are soon going to be the majority of our voters nationwide and here in Illinois. Again, it was 45% at the end of last year. It was 47% mid-year here. On this trajectory, we are a year away from independents being the majority at 50+% of our voters. And so that is our goal, is bringing together and building that independent majority. Another frustrating development in the campaign is we were informed this last weekend that the two major party candidates declined to participate in a debate hosted by the League of Women Voters in East Peoria. It was going to be broadcast around the state. I accepted the rules and accepted the invitation. J.B. Pritzker and Darren Bailey did not respond, which is to say that they refused to participate. This is frustrating for me as a candidate, of course, because I want to stand up there and debate my two opponents, but it really is frustrating for the political process. We've seen this more and more in recent years, that these candidates refuse to debate. J.B. Pritzker has refused to debate more than the bare minimum. He'll debate once or twice on Chicago TV, and that's about it. Darren Bailey refused to debate his opponents during the primary, so it's no surprise that he would avoid debates here in the general election. And many people have said to me, and both on the record and off the record, and media members have said on and off the record, that they wonder if these two candidates would be willing to stand up on stage with me. Not only because communications is what I do, and I've been quite adept at debating, going back to school, but also because the political parties don't want you to see the contrast between their talking points and somebody who is just actually mainstream and speaks from the heart as somebody who's mainstream. Take it from somebody who for 20 years wrote those talking points for these political candidates and political parties. It's increasingly an effort to take their positions and figure out some way to creatively word their positions so it seems mainstream. And you can get away with that if you have one extreme and the other on the stage, because they can just sort of yell and scream at each other, and you as the voter don't realize that neither of them said anything that made any sense. But when you add a third candidate up there, somebody who actually can sound normal and speak normal and align with your mainstream positions as voters, that changes the entire dynamic. And so that's been my concern, is will these candidates even have the guts to stand on stage with me and debate? Of course, they're going to say, why would we debate? We're the major parties. It's always the thing that they hide behind. But you have to wonder, if they can't handle me in a debate, can they handle being governor of this state? And that's increasingly been my question over the last few weeks and last few months, as we've seen these candidates fail at some of the most basic aspects of campaigning, and in the governor's situation, fail at some of the most basic aspects of being the governor. I'm frustrated at how weak our governor seems and looks when every time an issue comes up, the question is about property taxes. The question is about the funeral home tragedy in Illinois. The question is about energy rates. The question's about data centers. Pick your question, pick your issue. JB always goes back to, well, it's somebody else's fault. And even if you agree with that, how weak does that sound? Shouldn't your governor be the one who stands up and says, I'm the governor of Illinois? And yes, here are the facts. This happened, this happened, this happened. Maybe there was nothing we could do about it, but I'm the governor of Illinois. I'm going to dig down and make sure that there was nothing we could have done better. And most importantly, I'm going to figure out how to avoid this problem in the future. I mentioned that tragedy and KNL Mom. So far, we have nothing scheduled that has all three candidates who have agreed. We have the one forum, which has been canceled. I know several Chicago media outlets are considering pulling something together, but they're going to be doing some polling from what I've heard and then basing who they invite based on that polling, which is an interesting approach. And there are 2 forums on the books where me and Darren Bailey have agreed to participate, but J.B. Pritzker has not. One of those is the Technology Manufacturing Association. They've got a forum. We won't be on stage together. We get different times, but it is a forum with 2 of the 3 gubernatorial candidates. Me and Darren Bailey have agreed to participate. J.B. Pritzker has not. The Illinois Municipal League has also scheduled a forum, and so far Darren Bailey and I have agreed to participate. J.B. Pritzker has not. I think that's also going to be sort of a separate situation. So far there's nothing where even me and Darren Bailey are going to be interacting and answering questions together, so you can see a side-by-side comparison. The forum that was last Monday, the Ag Forum that I wasn't invited to, that's how it was done. Separate time slots. So you basically have candidates doing speeches and Q&As right after each other. That's not a forum, let alone a debate. So it is weak sauce out there. The voters deserve an opportunity to compare and contrast their candidates. And even the forums that are just the major party candidates aren't giving them that opportunity, which is a tragedy and a travesty for our political process. Anyways, going back to what I was talking about with the Chicago funeral home. So South Chicago Chapel Funeral Home. If you haven't paid attention, Google it. It is a ridiculous situation. And I'll share more details about it in a second, but I want to go finish the point that I was making, which is as I was talking to these families impacted by this tragedy, 2 things were clear. Number 1, some wanted to blame somebody, but most that I spoke to had no interest in blame. Even the governor. They had no interest in blaming the governor, even though they knew I was running against him. That wasn't what they wanted. They just wanted somebody to listen to them. And that was the thing. That's all they were asking for. They wanted to know somebody cared. And I was nobody important in the room. I'm a candidate. I'm not in elected office. But they were grabbing my arm, pulling me over, and just wanting to tell their story to someone. I give credit to the media that was there. There were 5 TV cameras. Multiple print outlets were there, and they were telling their stories. Not all of them got run, which is interesting. I hope they'll eventually run the footage. But these families, these people deserve to have their stories heard. I'll tell you why in a second if you don't know what went on with that tragedy. But it was sad to see that they were told there was an event previously where the alder person was invited and apparently just kind of brushed them off and treated them poorly, both organizers and attendees. State legislators were invited. None of them came out to things. Statewides were invited. None of them came out. And so even though I readily admit how unimportant I am, I was really the only one there representing Illinois government. Again, I'm not in government. But they just said, thank you for caring and please hear my story. And the stories were 20, 25 minutes long, their whole life story. But I sat there and I listened because they deserve to have somebody to listen. And I've said over and over, I don't blame J.B. Pritzker when things go wrong. I blame him when those things were avoidable. And I blame him when nothing is done to resolve them and avoid them happening again. This, whether it's DCFS or IDOC or some of the many things we've talked about, and now this funeral home situation, bad people do bad things. And that was what J.B. Pritzker essentially said when he was asked at a press conference about this situation. These are bad people, they did bad things, which is true. And so I'm not going to blame Pritzker for the bad things that bad people do, but I am going to blame him when those bad people could have been stopped from doing bad things. And that's what happened in this Chicago funeral home situation. This couple, these 2 individuals, the husband had been caught essentially forging a license to be able to pick up bodies at the morgue in Chicago. He had an intern license, not the appropriate license to be picking up bodies, and he eventually was caught. You got to ask yourself, who the heck does that? And he was caught, and so they yanked that license away. But he and his spouse still owned a crematory and a few other facilities, and nobody did anything to check into those or potentially even pull those licenses. And so not that long ago, if you look it up, this crematory that was in the news for a long time about, I think it was over 100 bodies were found piled up in trailers. It was gross and gut-wrenching at the same time because, as I learned last week, These are people's kids, their spouses, their parents, their grandparents. These are humans. And when you do that to those bodies, you then create a situation where the families are grieving almost in perpetuity. Because especially when it comes to cremation, there were then doubts raised about, were those the cremated remains of my family member? And so you now have individuals who can't get closure because they're doubting what's in that urn is even their family member, for good reason, as I'll explain in a second. So this controversy hits, and they yank the license for the crematory, but they don't look to see, are there other licenses from this couple? And the spouse owned this South Chicago Chapel funeral home and several others, by the way, which are now closed. And nobody thought, hey, we should go look into those. So here we are a year plus later, and now again, we're seeing headlines about 56 bodies which were found, and even worse than that, just as many cremated remains that hadn't been returned or provided to the families of those loved ones. Just awful. And again, these are people's family members. I talked to one woman who she has been trying to find the remains for her son for 2 years. Think about that. I mean, I've got a 2-year-old boy. Imagine, and this boy was 28, 29, she said. So it's not the same, but it is. It's your boy. Imagine losing your child and then having to fight for years to try to figure out where that child's remains are, because they were cremated and they never got the cremated remains. I don't understand how, for politicians who go running towards every camera any chance they get, how can you not be there to support those grieving families? How can you not be looking into what happened here and trying to find some way to resolve it? I get how one division, one department might not talk to another department. And so while I wish someone in government would have given a crap and said, hey, maybe we should look into this, I understand how it didn't happen. I'm just doing my job, one person might say, and that's not my job, and that's true. So again, I understand it. I don't agree with it. It shouldn't have happened, but I can see how it happened, especially when I explained to you how ridiculous our licensing and oversight is when it comes to these funeral homes. But again, I go back to, and let's put a bow on this point, how weak do you look as the governor to not just say, I am so sorry to the families that are going through this. This never should have happened. As your governor, I'm going to be there. I'm going to fix this. It's never going to happen again. And again, I go back to these families that I talked to, none of them blamed the governor. So there was no political liability here to say, I feel you, I'm sorry. And especially our governor who has preached about the value of empathy. How are you not empathizing, let alone sympathizing with these people going through the worst day of their lives again and again because of this tragedy? I don't get it. I implore you as the voters of Illinois, if you don't vote for me, at least vote for somebody who's going to step up and say, I'm going to be the governor and I'm going to lead. And J.B. Pritzker, so far, has proven that that's not him. Now it's the middle of August. Maybe, just maybe, since he wants to be president, he'll realize it's time to actually be a leader. Here's hoping. But that's what I just can't get over. How weak is that as the governor? Let me finish off the discussion about this Chicago funeral home situation, because I always want to be the person providing solutions. Let's first identify the problem so we can identify the solution. The problem here is the completely wackadoodle way that we provide oversight on crematories and funeral homes and the purveyors or providers or whatever you might want to call them. It's 2-3 different ways that we do it. So believe it or not, the Illinois comptroller provides oversight of crematories. I've been saying crematoriums, and so crematories sounds so weird in my head, but crematories is accurate. But I don't know why I think crematoriums should be the word. Anyways, I digress. So it's your Illinois comptroller who provides that oversight. But the comptroller's office does not provide oversight of funeral homes and does not license funeral home directors. It is the IDFPH, which licenses funeral home directors, but they do not license funeral homes. Nobody, apparently, licenses funeral homes, and IDFPH does not oversee funeral homes or, again, nobody does unless a complaint is filed. And so the idea here is our government is set up as reactive as it always is. There's no proactive oversight. There's no regulation or inspections. It's if a complaint is filed, then we will go check it out. That's how this is all set up. So not only is there a hole that nobody licenses funeral homes in this state, but there isn't any real oversight or there's regulation, but there's not oversight at all. So that's what we've got to change. Two things. Number one, this system where we're only going to look into it if there's complaints. I got to question that because everyone I talked to in the room last Friday, every single one of them said that they were filing complaints over and over. One woman even said that an agency, Department of Illinois government, went after her with lawyers and to get her to stop because apparently they didn't like that she was contacting so many people and complaining about where her missing family member was. And so there was even a paper trail and legal threats made against one of these people because they were complaining too much. And yet we're going to say that complaints weren't filed and so it's not IDFPH or Pritzker or state government or anybody else's fault that this wasn't caught until 56 bodies were decomposing with maggots and rats and all the disgusting things that had happened here. So I question this whole complaint process. Where does a complaint have to be filed before it's officially counted and somebody goes and checks out the funeral home? That's my first question here, especially because when we see how the state tends to do their oversight, let's just take a gander over at DCFS. When a complaint is filed, their investigation sometimes is simply making a phone call or two and then closing the complaint. So let's not pretend like Illinois' oversight is really that good when complaints are filed. Second, we've got to figure out who is going to actually provide oversight and who is going to license. There's a good point that was made. Give credit to, it was posted on Capitol Facts from Kyle Hillman, who I've known on socials over the years that we've never met. But he made a good point that IDFPH it licenses individuals, it licenses humans. And so his concern was that we shouldn't give them the responsibility to also license non-humans, license funeral homes, which I think is a valid concern. There may be a chance here to consolidate departments. We're talking a lot this week about marijuana and the frustration with marijuana and weed and hemp and all the different entities, dispensaries and others is there's 5 different regulatory oversight entities for what they do. We see that all the time. So some states create some sort of regulatory oversight commission or department or whatever division, depending on how it's structured, that oversees sort of everything post-life, whether it's funeral homes, crematories, how bodies are handled, the health aspects of that. So that's one option here. It is seems to me common sense, but it also is creating more government, which isn't necessarily something that I'd always align with. But I do believe that we need to look with fresh eyes at our government at this state and wonder, just like the Pritzker just did and the legislature just did with the Department of Early Childhood Services, should we be taking a fresh look at how we structure our government and maybe do things like have one oversight commission when it comes to businesses and their regulations and the licenses they need, and one when it comes to post-life for funeral homes and death and morgues and elected officials that oversee all that and the appointed officials and the businesses that oversee all that and crematories, etc. Should we have one that oversees all marijuana-related activities and businesses? Seems to me to be something that somebody coming into government as an independent with fresh eyes might be able to achieve, whereas those who have been in government for decades might instead prefer to stick with just the way it is now and tinker at the margins. Something to consider. So that's the Chicago situation, and something we absolutely have to do better in Illinois. If you've got questions or things you want to cover, feel free to jump in the chat. I appreciate some of you gone in there. Brookdale, you did see my photo for IML. You're looking forward to it. Awesome. Hope to see you there. If you're looking forward to that, that must mean you serve in local government. So I look forward to seeing you at that forum, at that event. Anybody else has questions or comments, feel free to jump in. I've got a few things that have come up on my socials. So while you're doing that, I do want to bring those up and have that conversation. One of the things we got to talk about is, this was asked of me by multiple TV stations and reporters, is what do we do because CPS and CTU, Chicago Public Schools, Chicago Teachers Union, are demanding $150 million from the state. In fact, they have passed a budget that relies on $150 million that has never actually been promised or provided from the state, which is an interesting and not so fiscally responsible budgetary tactic, which many people have rightfully called them out for. And I know even a number of Chicago school board members have opposed this. So that's a question that's up right now, especially because J.B. Pritzker was endorsed by the IEA, which is not CTU related. That's an IFT union. But because Pritzker was on stage with teachers, we're talking education as a result. So there's lots of questions about that and comments and discussions about education. So a lot of people have asked, what are you going to do about that? Even J.B. Pritzker has said that's not responsible budgeting, and that's not realistic to expect that you're going to get $150 million from the state. And so that's a position that I also share. Where I differ maybe from a Darren Bailey is I believe we need to do a better job funding our schools in the state. We have a lot of rural and suburban school districts that are funded below adequacy, and in many cases significantly below adequacy. I have worked with school districts whose adequacy percentage was in the 60s, some who were in the 70s, and you see how much those school districts struggle to be able to provide the quality education that every kid in this state deserves. I hope one thing we can all agree with is that a child's education should never depend on their zip code, on where they're born. Never, ever. But that's the reality here in Illinois. And I know Chicago public schools want to see more funding, and they are below that 100% adequacy target, but let's first be real here. CPS is funded, they spend more per student than the state average, than the national average. And so while I do understand that they would like to see that adequacy number be at 100%, there are school districts in Illinois that are way worse off than CPS is. That doesn't diminish the challenges that Chicago schools are facing. But right now, even CPS's allies left of center have said they need to do a better job managing the tax dollars that they currently receive. During COVID, they received a whole lot of one-time or two-time or three-time funds from the federal government and from the state. And instead of using that to pay down bills or invest in infrastructure, they put it into their base spending. So now they're trying to refill funding that never was supposed to be intended for long-term, constant, year after year annual funding. They have schools that are attended by a handful of students at most. I know that Rahm, the way that he closed schools, has made it now a pariah in Chicago politics. You can't even talk about closing schools because the way Rahm did it, now it polls horribly. But if you look at it from an efficiency standpoint, when you're serving fewer and fewer students every year, you probably should look into some version of consolidation. I've worked with school districts where they have no longer used certain school buildings, but then they use them for special education services, which you prefer to have in their home districts, in their home schools. But sometimes if you need to have an additional facility for that, they've used them for early childhood. They've used them for specialized school services, advanced school services. There are things you can use a school building for without having to say you've officially closed down that school building, or you could simply sell that building and use those tax dollars towards educating your current students. There's things you could do from the school side of things that Chicago public schools aren't looking at, and yet they still just want us to give them more money. So I'm not interested in giving more tax dollars until I see more fiscal responsibility. And that has always been my approach. When I work with school districts, which I've been honored to have worked with dozens of school districts around the state. I only work with school districts that are fiscally responsible. Every district that you've seen that I've worked with has been the second lowest tax rate of their peer districts, the lowest tax rate in their county, the lowest spending per student in their region or among their peer districts. They have cut spending. One thing I particularly look at is what is their spending when it comes to administration. And what's that ratio of administrators to students? I've worked with hundreds of administrators, and I'll tell you, they work their butts off. And in many of these school districts that have the lowest administrator, so I'm going to word this right, the highest ratio or lowest percentage of money spent on administration, you've got 3 or 4 or 5 administrators who are doing the job of 10 and they're exhausted. But they're doing that because they want to see what limited funds are available to the district being spent in classrooms. And I love that. And those are the districts that I seek out to go support, to go work with, to get them the funding that they need to invest in their infrastructure or hire more teachers because they need them in the classrooms. That's where I choose to spend my time and invest my talents, because those districts are the ones that need help. And so when I talk about education in this state, it's with these districts in mind that have the lowest funding percentage throughout the state of Illinois, who are making do with what they have. But you see, compared to my home district or probably your home district, you see the facilities that some of these kids are learning in, schools 100 years old, health challenges, health problems, because there is asbestos in the ceilings that they can't abate, they can't deal with. Their furniture is still 40, 50 years old. Their science labs have been shut down because they don't work anymore. These aren't districts looking for the latest, greatest fancy computers and fancy electronics. They literally have kids sitting in rows in classroom style, packed into rooms that are much too small for them. They have kids receiving mental health services and support services in closets because they don't have spaces to put them in. Or they're receiving those services in the hallway because there isn't even a closet, there isn't even a room to put them in. There's one school district we work with where a kid had to pull himself up and pull himself down the stairs every day because he had to get upstairs to a certain classroom for a class that he was taking, and they didn't have a working elevator. These are the things that shouldn't happen in our schools, and that's what I have spent time trying to resolve. And as a result of our work, we've been able to secure over $1.6 billion for local schools, almost as much as what J.B. Pritzker has provided through EBF, and I don't have the power of the state's purse strings to do it. It is possible to make those investments, and that's what I want to achieve, is to better fund our schools in this state. It's going to take time. I'm not going to be like the Republican candidate in this race and give you the one sentence AI generated, I'm just going to do X, and say, cool, let's just go find some magic beans and plant them, and suddenly money appears and we could just give it out to the schools and everybody else. I'm not going to do that because that's going to be lying to you, and I didn't get in this race to lie to you. What I am going to do is what I've told you over and over in these lives and in our podcasts, on my website, and in things that we've put out in interviews. We have a whole plan to make the state more fiscally responsible, to stop wasting on projects and programs that are not benefiting taxpayers, to be responsible with bonds that are rolling off, and to invest those in 3 key areas. Number 1 is education. Invest those into education to make sure we're fully funding our school districts. Number 2, invest those into paying down our pension debt. Number 3, into fully funding LGDF. And then tying that additional funding that's going to local school districts to an incentive program to make sure that they're giving you property tax lowering your property taxes as a result of the additional funding that we're providing them from the state. I'm not interested in dumping all this money into our municipalities, our counties, our school districts, and then having that just go into their base funding and not see your property taxes go down. So we're going to make sure we do both things. Let's make sure that our municipalities, our counties, our school districts all get the funding they need to succeed, but let's also make sure that a significant percentage of that is flowing down to you so that we can lower your property taxes in this state. That's the goal. So long answer to something that came up this week, but that's the point of these lives, is to be able to dive in depth on these policies. let's go to, let's scroll down here and see what's next here. We've talked a lot about data centers, so I'll skip past that. We've had a few things that we've brought up this week about marijuana and hemp. So I think it was in the first live that I did, I had a handful of people ask questions about where I stood on marijuana related, weed and hemp related, dispensary related issues. And I admitted at the time that while I had a few higher level thoughts that I shared, it's one of the few areas in Illinois policy that I didn't have in-depth knowledge. I still don't, but I'm working on it. But that's what I'd like you to see is when I'm talking to you about policies, I don't have notes. I mean, this is probably going to be, look, I've got my social media up here. I've got the YouTube up here. That's it. I don't have notes. I don't have a script. When you see me do videos, it's me talking to you. Compare that to when Pritzker or Bailey do a video. They're literally reading off a script the entire time. Watch their eyes, watch them do it. They're just reading what someone else wrote for them. I'm speaking from the heart. And so when I talk about policies, it's information that I have learned. It's people that I've spoken to. My running mate, Carolyn Schofield, and I have spent a tremendous amount of time talking to experts all throughout the state of Illinois over the last 4 or 5 months, getting their feedback, their opinions, their expertise on what are the problems in Illinois, what are the solutions. We're going to be rolling a lot of that out in the coming days and weeks. We've already been doing it, as you've seen. We are putting in a tremendous amount of effort to actually identify solutions to the problems we face. We're not giving you the talking points, let alone the 1 or 2 or 3 sentence social media posts or the quick 10-second shorts. We're giving you some of that because my producer and my team, they understand that on social media, if you want to get noticed by the algorithm, you got to play the game. So we're doing a little bit of it. But in the course of this campaign, we want to give you actual policy. And so one of the few areas that I don't have deep knowledge of in Illinois policy is marijuana policy. And so we've been endeavoring to fix that. I've talked to a few experts in recent weeks. On Monday, I was down about an hour-ish southwest of Peoria touring a hemp farm, which was really cool. And then I did a roundtable down there, which we'll be releasing very soon with a few people from the hemp industry. And this week's podcast guest is somebody who has deep knowledge and was a leader in the marijuana industry, and she's going to share some of her knowledge. I'm learning here as I try to share this information with you, because as I'm learning, there are serious problems in what is a major industry in Illinois. We did over $1.5 billion, and if you account for all areas of marijuana in the state, it was, I think, $2.3 billion in sales. It's a significant driver in tax revenue for state and even other governments. This is a major sector of our economy and something that matters a lot to a lot of people. The stories I heard on Monday, which was just yesterday, which is crazy to me. Anyways, campaign world. The stories that I heard on Monday of this local independent craft grower who she was able to grow strains that were specifically needed for medical needs of people in that community. And there was a nearby Amish community that they struggle because in their way of life, they don't have certain things that you and I might take for granted, like identification. And so in order to go to a dispensary, an official dispensary, and buy there, you need to have identification. And so there was an individual there who struggled with health challenges, who this woman was able to help them because she was able to find out what those challenges were and get them several strains to try, and some worked, some didn't. And then next year she could plant a few more that may work even better. That's the give and take that you might get at a local craft grower, independent grower, that you maybe wouldn't get at a larger, like an MSO or a dispensary, because they're running a business. They maybe can't do that and cater to one person like that. And so I've seen now the perspective of our hemp growers, the hemp industry, our craft growers, our independents. Hopefully when we record our podcast, which releases on Friday, I'll get the perspective from the other side. And I've already gotten it from some who have texted and who have called after my Monday post, who have been sharing the perspective of dispensaries and the challenges that they face in Illinois, and the perspective of the larger growers and the challenges that they face. These are things that, again, admittedly, I don't know enough about, but I hope you see. I'm practicing what I preach here. I am actively endeavoring to learn, and I'm not afraid to say, I don't know. I'm not afraid to share my limited knowledge and then ask you guys and the public to help me fill the rest. I'll be honest, that's hard to do. I've been teaching candidates for a long time, and I've always taught them it's okay to say you don't know. But I always told them I know how hard that is, because when you're running for office, you want people to look at you like the leader, and it's never comfortable, especially in a media interview, to say, yeah, I don't know. That is one of the hardest things that I've learned that you could do in this process. So I get now why candidates don't do it. But this is what I want in our state. I want our elected officials to be open to new information. I want our leaders to know a lot and to know enough that they could share it, that they could make policy, which I'm not seeing from at least one, if not two of my opponents in this race. But I also want them to be constantly seeking out that knowledge. Maybe it's because I didn't have the benefit of a college education. I desperately wanted to go to college. I had really, 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 really good grades. I had finished enough to graduate high school by my 9th grade year. And did well enough in my grades and my ACTs that I was accepted to a whole bunch of colleges, and my dream was to go to Northwestern. But I didn't have that opportunity. And the school I grew up in was very small, so we didn't have a lot of the benefits that these larger public schools had. And so I've always had to seek out knowledge and information myself. And maybe that self-taught nature is why I am the way that I am in this race and in politics in general, where I'm not only willing, but eager to admit when I don't know something, because that's when you can gain information. Why fake it and continue then to have to fake it for the rest of your life? Why not be humble enough to admit you don't know and go seek out that information? So that's what I've been endeavoring to do. So for those of you who are more on, whether it's hemp or on the independent grower side, I've heard you in some of the things that I want to try to make happen in this state are protecting our independent growers, our smaller farmers, protecting our hemp industry, which right now, based on some federal actions, even more than state actions, is being essentially shut down in some ways. There was legislation passed towards the end of this last session, actually at the end of this last session, where a consensus was not reached. There were some people negotiating in good faith, some people negotiating in bad faith. They were fighting back and forth, and a bill was put through that wasn't as comprehensive and as consensus as it could have been. Now, all sorts of fingers being pointed, including in my text messages, as to why that happened. I don't care whose fault it is. What I care about is going after, when you talk about the hemp industry specifically, a lot of people think about the gas station weed. They think about the infused products that are being marketed potentially even to kids. Not potentially. It, in many cases, is being marketed to kids. They see this side of the industry that is, they're the bad actors. And we see it at gas stations and at the shop you see and the seedy storefront that you drive by. But the problem is the law-abiding people, the good people in that hemp industry, that hemp world, they also hate that. That thing you don't want to see, that marketing, that selling to kids, the lack of transparency, the unsafe products, they don't like that either. And they want to see that regulated out too. And so there is a path here to find common ground where we institute common sense regulations that require full transparency of all ingredients when it comes to hemp products, that make sure that regulate that they're not selling to, marketing to underage individuals, to kids, that make sure, what am I missing here? Oh, lab testing is a big deal. The hemp growers, the independents that I've talked to over the last couple of weeks, they all say that they voluntarily have done that lab testing. Let's codify that. Let's make that a requirement. But let's also allow them to operate. This requirement that they have to work through dispensaries seems like a very heavy-handed answer to the problem because it dramatically increases costs for these independent growers and for those few independent growers that can still operate outside of dispensaries, requiring them to have commercial kitchens, which and specialized filtration and air units and AC and special, I think I heard plastic on the walls. These are all overly burdensome when you consider the fact that previously they were operating more under a farmer's market sort of mentality, where if it's good enough for the food that you're going to allow to be served to humans that they're going to ingest at farmers markets, it's probably good enough for a topical that they're going to put on their skin. I think that's a reasonable position. But I don't know everything about this yet. I haven't had deep conversations with representatives of the MSOs, of dispensaries. I'm going to be having that this week. So maybe by next Tuesday's live, I'll have a different opinion, a more balanced opinion. I don't know. But so far, what I've heard from these independent growers and from the hemp industry, it seems to me that a really heavy-handed approach was taken to something that is now shutting down local farmers, local businesses unnecessarily. But tell me if I'm wrong. Pop over to the comments, make sure I'm not missing anybody. All right, let's drop down. We're almost done for today. I've done good. I haven't looked at the Cubs-Sox game. Looking at my producer, he's probably watching it. Yeah, Cubs are up. Yeah, screw you. All right. Maybe it's good that I'm not watching it. I know I had another thing that people wanted to ask about. So let me pop over to that. Oh, we had Tyson Foods. Another thing I wanted to talk about. So Tyson Foods. Let me see if I want to make sure I get this right. So there was a plant, I don't have it listed here on my social media, where their facility was located. I should have known that offhand, but it was in the Quad Cities. I just can't remember the specific town that it was in. But Tyson Foods has closed a plant that's been open since 1983 in the Quad Cities. 2,700 workers are out of jobs. And this sparked a massive debate on my socials and other people's socials because everyone's looking for who to blame as a result. I want to be fully transparent as to the factors here. There are political factors. And if you want to assign blame, there is some blame here for Pritzker and our business environment. There is some blame for tariffs and Trump, the war in Iran, and the input costs that increases in our agricultural industry. The majority of the blame is this has been a path we've been on for years. There's a massive cattle shortage in America, which is exacerbated by our politics, but some of this is something we've been headed towards. We have steady, if not increasing, demand for beef. I am proudly one of those people who continues to increase that demand because love my meat. But the supply has been decreasing. So that's a majority of the factor here. Tyson Foods has closed plants in multiple locations, not just Illinois, and they have cited that that's a major reason why. So before we start pointing fingers politically, let's point to the fact that this is something bigger than politics that has led to this. But we also can't ignore the factors that exacerbated the problem. And on the one side, I have probably half of these social media comments that want to attack Trump in D.C. And these are my more left of center followers and contacts who every problem is Trump. It's all Trump, Trump, Trump in D.C. And I will grant that tariffs have not helped this situation. I've talked a lot about tariffs over the years on podcasts, my own podcast included, that I've been educated on tariffs by proponents of tariffs, that there actually are good uses of tariffs. But kind of like the school closure debate in Chicago, where when you do something badly, you make that thing so unfavorable that now nobody else can touch it. And that's what Rahm did to school closures in Chicago. What Trump has done to tariffs is the same thing. That now we can't really even have a conversation about tariffs because we need fair trade in this country. We need to protect our farmers. And when you're competing in a global marketplace, which our farmers and our manufacturers especially are doing, when you have countries that are cheating, like China and others, then when you play by a set of rules they're not playing by, you've put your manufacturers, your farmers at a disadvantage. And so tariffs can be a tool to level that playing ground and create fair trade in the world, but of course, for American workers. But the problem is the way Trump has done tariffs, now tariffs are so unpopular that you can't even talk about tariffs. So that's my frustration when it comes to tariffs. But the way they've been implemented has been extremely poor, and it has raised costs for Americans. And now you add on top of that the Iran war, which I have spoken out about. I don't want Iran to have the bomb. Nobody wants Iran to have the bomb. But there were ways to go about doing that didn't dump us into an endless Middle East war that we were promised wasn't going to happen again. And that doesn't just raise your gas prices, that raises the prices of everything else that relies on gas and even that oil. And so even in ag, even in farming, even in processing of beef, those costs are increased because of the increased price of gas, increased price of oil, and tariffs, which are placed on input costs like feed for those cows. So there are the people left of center on my social media who want to rail on the right and rail on Trump. They are accurate in some of the things that they're bringing up. The people in my feed who want to attack Pritzker for the horrible business environment in Illinois are also right. That one of the plants that Tyson is closing is here in Illinois. That's not accidental. This isn't the first time we've seen this. There have been a number of national and international businesses, many of which are in the manufacturing space, who, when they need to reduce costs, they've looked to Illinois first. Or when they look to figure out where they're going to invest, they look at Illinois last. Those are directly due to the horrible business environment in Illinois under J.B. Pritzker. We just had to update the numbers that we've put out. So let me make sure I get this right. I'm going to pull up my website because I don't have these memorized enough that I'm not going to lie. Where we've talked about GDP growth in Illinois. Well, we are 46th in GDP growth under J.B. Pritzker since he took office. It was 43rd when I drafted the messaging, and it's gotten worse since then. We are, let me pull this up and make sure I get it right. Here we go. Since J.B. Pritzker took office, I'm going to look at my producer. The website has not been updated, sir, so I'm not going to get it right. Job growth, I think we're 45th. And then on income growth, we are still 39th in the country. We have on unemployment, I think we're the 5th highest now, but it says 6th highest here. And then we've got residents leaving at the 3rd highest rate. I could go on and on with all the numbers, but our economy in this state is not growing and hasn't been growing under J.B. Pritzker. And there's many, many reasons for that we have articulated over and over and over on these podcasts. And so you can put some blame here at the feet of J.B. Pritzker and the majority party, which is Democrats down in Springfield, for high spending, high taxes, high regulations, and making it increasingly difficult and expensive to do business in this state. And so, yes, businesses like Tyson, when they need to cut costs, when they need to close a plant, they're going to look to cut their most expensive plants in their roster. And Illinois is going to be right up there. So, yes, J.B. Pritzker does earn some of the blame here for this, despite those people who on my socials who always want to go in there and say it's never Pritzker's fault. So that's that. All right, we are almost to the end of our hour. I want to make sure we get to everybody. Let me pop back over. Jocelyn, thank you, Michelle. That's very helpful. And Brookdale, state of Illinois has recently increased the amount of chronic medical recreational users can have on their persons. So that is good news. I think the more that we recognize that people manage their illnesses, they manage their pain in different ways, that's a good thing. I like competition. You know what? If you want to live in a world of crony capitalism, which right now is what Illinois has, is crony capitalism in so many different areas of our economy. I get that. I understand that it's easier to compete in a marketplace where you get to set the rules and keep out your competitors, but that's not my job to make it easier for you to make money. My job is to make it an even playing field so you can compete with anybody else in your industry. And oh, by the way, that's going to help working families because it's going to lower costs for them as it forces you to find efficiencies and lower your prices and lower your costs. That's my job as governor of Illinois. And that's always what I'm going to put first. So what you can count on from me me is that you're not going to see a situation where your competitors are given advantages over you in the marketplace. And those competitors can include special interests and organizations that have backing from maybe one party over the other. What you'll never get from me is somebody who's going to put their thumb on the scale for you because you're somebody who has the best lobbyists, or you cut the biggest checks, or you happen to know me or have my number. That's not going to get you preferential treatment, I'm sorry to say. And if that's what you're hoping for, vote for the other guys. Because what you're going to get from me is doing things the right way and actually creating a level playing field in this state where competition can lead. And if you've got the best product, if you've got the best workers, if you've got the best team, if you get the best marketing, the best whatever, then you're going to win, because I'm going to make sure that you have a fair environment in this state. But you're not going to win simply because you forced your competitors out. That's not going to happen. And by the way, what people want to do on their own time, what people want to do in their own lives is their business. That's always how I felt. So this idea that we're not going to let people grow on their land, that we're not going to let them have a few plants in their garage, is absolutely asinine to me. It is ridiculous that people can't live their lives, that government's going to tell people how they can live their lives on a daily basis. The very same people that say they want government out of medical decisions, that government shouldn't tell women how to make decisions with their bodies, are the same people that are saying government's going to tell you you can't have a couple plants in your garage. Let's be consistent in our arguments. Let's be consistent in our approach to government. That seems to me to be common sense. All right, let me scroll through my socials, make sure that since last Tuesday, I've covered the things that have come up the most on my social media that we've brought up. I'll ask my producer if there's anything else we've covered. We've talked property taxes already. Bad weather. That could be where I could finish on this. Let's talk about the bad weather. So while J.B. Pritzker was down in Springfield, Darren Bailey, kudos to him, went to the south suburbs. My wife and I were down there with some friends and family and shared some of their photos the day before. We didn't do press on it. Probably should have. My PR team said I should have. Credit to Darren and Aaron. They did press the next day and got some media to cover them to say that JB should be there. Where I disagree is attacking JB for being down in the state fair, doing his duty as the governor of Illinois, who is supposed to open the state fair. And the state fair is a big deal. Our ag industry is a big deal in the state. And Central Illinois, Darren and Aaron have talked about how all of Illinois deserves to be represented. Well, the state fair is a big deal to Central Illinois, and rightfully so. So having the governor there, my problem with the governor was not that he was there then. My problem was that he wasn't up in the south suburbs several days prior when I was, or the day after that, the morning after that, before going down to the state fair. But whatever, I'm getting lost. Also, I don't know if anybody saw, but one of the social media posts from the Bailey campaign was they were going to get their hands dirty and help out. So they posted a video of them lifting a small branch. The two of them. Took two of them to lift this branch. I don't understand why. Lifting it, moving it 6 inches, and dropping it down again. And that was them getting their hands dirty. That campaign drives me crazy. Anyways, coming back to being the candidate instead of being the pundit. They got a valid hit on Pritzker. They got some coverage on Pritzker not being there. So Pritzker the next day went there to the south suburbs and signed some legislation and brought some attention to the challenges that the people in the south suburbs, Will County, Cook County, were facing. You had hundreds of thousands of people who were out of power. My wife grew up in Homewood, and so she shared story after story from family members and friends, some of which we got to talk to, who were not just out of power, but dealing with tremendous flooding. They had home damage, which I never like sharing those photos, so I didn't share any of those photos. It's been, the viaducts were completely underwater. There was cars that you saw. One of them shared a video with me of them pushing a car through the water to try to get it out to where it could drive. There was a lot of devastation and damage, and basements that had been flooded for 10 days straight, which causes so much damage in those houses. It really was devastating to see. So my heart and my wife, our hearts go out to friends and family and everyone in the south suburbs. Again, I mentioned my wife, her family, they all grew up down there in Homewood. So this was personal to her. But I want to end this live on a positive story. What I love is how human positivity comes out in a tragedy. My wife shared with me a story about how a bunch of the restaurants in Flossmoor all got together along with the brewery or the market there, Dunning's Market, to put food out and have food out for people who had been trying to clean up from the damage and trying to help their neighbors. The Flossmoor Station and Brewery, which my wife and I have been to, and with her mom and some family members, and it's a great place. They participated in this. A whole bunch of other restaurants and businesses participated. And really, in the worst of times, you see the best of humanity. And I love, in the course of the campaign, to be able to shine a spotlight on those times when the best of us shines through. Yeah, we can get negative. And I've too often gotten negative in the course of this campaign. I try really hard not to. The problem is our social media world, the algorithms, it rewards negativity. And so it's so easy for any of us to get dragged down into that. But if we can accomplish anything, it's to shine a spotlight on just how amazing the people of this state is, the future, the hope that we truly have for Illinois. It's in those tragedies where you have your faith in humanity restored. So to the people of Flossmoor, of Homewood, of the whole region, who neighbors were helping neighbors, running extension cords to try to help their neighbors or people down the street, daisy chaining extension cords to try to get them power. You're what make Illinois great already. And I want to get our politics out of the way so you can thrive. That's where we're going to end this episode. Thank you for being with us. I look forward to catching you next Tuesday night on the next live episode of Live from the Lincoln Desk.